So now we will continue with the keynote for today. And none other than Wijnand IJsselsteijn. He is a full professor at the TU Eindhoven from the Department of Industrial Engineering and Innovation Sciences. And he has this very compelling keynote, and it's called The Imitation Game Revisited, Questioning the Metaphors We Use to Understand AI. Please give a warm applause to Wijnand IJsselsteijn. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's an incredible honor to be here and to be able to share some of the perspectives that we have, let's say from social science onto this really fast developing world of artificial intelligence. I think about 2 years ago, I would have thought that a prompt engineer is an engineer who arrives at work on time. Things have changed quite a bit, let's say, over the past few years. And it all started with a summer project where 10 very smart people, cognitive scientists, computer scientists, decided to try and crack this conundrum of human intelligence. And basically, they proposed a 2-month project for this in Dartmouth. And again, of course, we see that it showed up to be a little bit more challenging than maybe they anticipated. And I also feel that even at the point that we are today, many of the challenges that they identified are still beyond our reach in many ways. My perspective is one of a social scientist. I regard myself primarily a psychologist, also well-versed, let's say, in AI. And I try and understand this relationship that we're building with technology in general, and AI specifically. And of course, AI has some human characteristics to it. There's no denying that. But I also want to be skeptical about the way we talk about AI in terms of agentic, sort of intentionalist ways. And this is why I want to also highlight the importance of language. And already somebody mentioned this. Words have impact. And also in the scientific discourse, this is true. So maybe first, what is AI trying to accomplish? If we go to a standard textbook and see what kind of ambitions are being formulated, you can see that they fall more or less in 4 categories. So either a system that thinks like humans or acts like a human, or a system that thinks rationally or acts rationally. Alan Turing was already mentioned earlier, and he came up in this 1950 paper on computer machinery and intelligence with a test to determine whether or not the system is intelligent. And because there's such a diversity of opinions about what intelligence actually is, he operationalized it as a game, the imitation game. It wasn't called the Turing test back then, we did so afterwards. And in this game, basically, people are left in the dark as to whether they're interacting with a human or with a machine. And so basically, the interaction is through... Oh, I'm sorry. Should I shut this off, or? All right, okay. So whether they're interacting with a... Is this better? I guess so. All right, sorry about that. So whether they're interacting with a machine or a human, but their only interaction modality would be through question and answer through text. This Turing test has sort of stood the test of time for a long time, I think. However, we're now reaching the moment that we're actually passing. Have machines passed the Turing test in many sort of practical ways? But also, Turing test is being increasingly criticized, for one thing, because of its lack of sort of multimodal interaction, right? We only have this text-only interaction. But for another thing, it's also really dependent on the smartness of the human, let's say, in finding the right ways of testing the machine for its intelligence. And so alternatives have been also proposed, and I think they will also, be challenging to the AI to a certain extent. What's interesting, though, is that you see kind of in this game, there is a rhetoric of, let's say, competition, right? There's a rhetoric of is AI able to outsmart us, to deceive us? And this is a rhetoric you find quite frequently in the world of AI, specifically when it's mentioned in popular media. Will we be ruled by AI in the future? How do we stand our ground as humans when so much intelligence is being created outside of humans? And so we see this, especially in when there's developments around playing games, because that's an adversarial mode. But we see this also in the public discourse around the impact of AI on society. Now, I'd like to take a step back and, as a psychologist, maybe first ponder about how do humans use intelligence, and maybe that goes back to the question, why do we have a brain? And this is not as simple a question as it may seem. Of course, you would die without a brain, etc. You wouldn't be able to do what you want to do. But there's good reasons to have a brain as a mammal, as opposed to, for instance, a tree, who don't have a typical brain. And Daniel Wolpert, who's a neuroscientist, he gave a very clear and somewhat provocative answer. He said, well, brains are there for one reason and one reason only, which is to support action. It's not to think about poetry, it's not to solve Sudokus, it's not to do science even. It's really to support successful adaptive action. And he gives an example of the sea squirt as a case in point. The sea squirt, in Dutch zeeschede, is a little animal. It starts out as an animal. It floats around in the sea, and it has a brain to basically coordinate its movements, find food, avoid dangers, etc. So midway in its life, it decides to settle down. Let's say it attaches itself to a coral reef and effectively becomes a plant. It doesn't move anymore from that coral reef. So the first thing it does after having take permanent residence in the coral reef is it'll eat its own brain for food. Now, you might wonder, why would it do that? Well, first of all, it doesn't need it anymore, and brains are expensive. Energetically speaking, it's about 20% of your current, energy is being used by your brain. So it's an expensive thing to keep if you don't really need it. So the idea here is that only when you need to have survival, or when you have survival advantages, a brain will be useful. And so this goes back to the basics of survival, right? Evolutionary theory, if you like. And we more or less distinguish 4 F's of survival, the 4 basic drivers of behavior, if you like: fighting, fleeing, feeding, and reproduction. And of course, in these 4 F's, also social coordination is key, because we've not evolved as individuals. We have evolved as a species to work in groups. So in fact, that's also key to our survival. Now, most models of intelligence will not focus on these sort of embodied skills and ways in which we are adaptive to the environment that enhances our survival. Only recently in cognitive science, there's been an acknowledgement of the importance of the body, for instance, in surviving and in thinking as well, in supporting the way we relate to the world and understand the world. Also in action, so constituting knowledge through interaction with the environment, thinking through bodily activities, using our body to help us think. For instance, I'm gesturing now, and gesturing is not just a means of non-verbal communication towards you, it's also a means for me to help me think. And we know this from experiments, right? If you have to sit on your hands and make a point, it's much more difficult to think. And also we think by interacting with others. We have this thing called transactive memory, where we really are aware of what other people around us know, also what technology can offer us, and we integrate that into our thinking process. Now, at the same time, because we're such evolutionary species, we're also vulnerable to certain biases. This has been shown time and again in cognitive psychology. For instance, Kamen and Tversky have written extensively on this. Our brains are optimized to support fast action, sort of the kind of do-or-die dynamics of our evolutionary environments in which our brains evolved. So thinking is also opportunistic and prone to error. For instance, we have limited ability to allocate attention to more than a relatively small number of stimuli. We have difficulty to correctly recall facts and experiences. In that way, our brains are not at all like a computer who can store information perfectly and infinitely. We have all kinds of biases in organizing comparisons and evaluations in a consistent manner. We're easy to influence in changing our judgment based on the kind of context in which we're judging. And we also are very bad at assigning correct probabilities. We tend to overestimate effects that are short-term and underestimate things that happen over a long period of time, temporal discounting. So we see that we struggle, right, in relating to the world, especially the modern world, where a lot of information is also key to our survival. We have on the right-hand side a list of things that, no, our brains are not, let's say, evolved to do well. So there are things we struggle with. On the left-hand side, you see things that we do well. Typically things that involve action, fast adaptive action to environments, and also group interaction. Now the things on the right-hand side are typically things that computers do really well, right? So, and we develop these as tools to support our weaknesses, but as AI is progressing, you also see the AI functionality encroaching on, let's say, movement, pattern. Certainly, perceptual AI is going a long way. Now, what does all of this have to do with our relationship to AI? I think computers and AI is a cognitive technology that can really help us in improving our understanding of the world and our own smarts. And this is how I would like to position AI, not as an independent agent or as an autonomous system, so much as a tool that will support us and increasingly and incrementally enhance our cognitive function. Now, a well-designed AI will offer us a way to interact with it that allows us to really understand the world in different ways. It really becomes a cognitive tool that offers us some new primitives of thought. Now, we can think of technology as a thinking tool, as mind support tools, if you like. It leverages our own functioning. And as Bo Dalman, a philosopher quoted by Dan Dennett, said, you can't do much carpentry with your bare hands, and you can't do much thinking with your bare brain. So really, and also Einstein mentioned something similar, as in my pencil and I are smarter than I am, which means that if you can sort of externalize part of your cognitive process, you can simplify it, and it becomes epistemically more approachable. Now, we have many powerful thinking tools at our disposal, not merely AI. Of course, the fact that I'm using language to convey knowledge is in itself a cognitive tool. But we use numbers. We have all kinds of systems designed to help us think, to really leverage our abilities. Diagrams, notations like the Feynman diagram, musical notation, methods like the scientific method to find things out which are true in the world. And of course, technologies. We have various technologies at our fingertips. You all have your smartphones and your laptops and what have you, but notebooks equally important. And of course, AI. Now, AI can be, I think, and I think most of us will agree on that, an incredibly strong, specific tool in well-defined domains where unambiguous rule sets and/or sufficient quantity and quality of data are available. But AI also has its limitations, and it has ways in which it's unlike human intelligence, and I think it's important to highlight that. So when we talk about machine learning, we use the word learning, but it's not the same as the way in which humans learn, the way we understand the world and relate to the world. So the term learning is in fact a metaphor. It means that a computer can improve at its programmed automated task, but using that word can also be misleading because it's laden with all kinds of associations and expectations that we have about human learning that we project onto the AI system. So bear in mind that an AI system does not take initiative to learn, doesn't have intrinsic curiosity or drive to learn. It's not rewarding in itself to learn. It doesn't understand what's being learned, does not contextualize its learning in a larger set of knowledge. It doesn't have agency in what it chooses to learn, nor subjectivity, a self, if you like, to whom the learning acquires a deeper layer of meaning. Also, the word deep in deep learning has some problematic set of associations. It feels like there's a depth of thought, wisdom, if you like. For instance, transfer of learning to other domains, which is a real big challenge in AI still. All things considered judgments, which is typical for ethical assessments of consequences of, for instance, technology in our lives. This is not something an AI would be well versed to do at the moment. And even the word neural network, although I see the similarities, being a neuropsychologist myself, there's also a great limitation to the extent to which those two are similar. Now, if we pit deep learning, let's say, against deep understanding and how we humans relate to the world, we acquire meaning through meaningful connections at various different levels of granularity. There's a level of evolution, there's a level of ontogenesis, let's say, there's a level of growing up within a certain species, within a family, within a local context. So the world, the environment, is deeply ingrained in the way we think and act. We have culture, we have language with symbols and tools and artifacts to our disposal, which structure our thinking as well. We have a body with its sensory motor experiences, its abilities and limitations, joys, vulnerabilities, and pains. And these are really things that motivate us to act in a certain way, to take certain decisions, and to think in certain ways. It defines our limitations, but also defines the possibility space and the things we find important, our priorities. So think back of Turing's imitation game. The kind of intelligence that's being tested there has quite a small bandwidth. And not merely for the fact that it's only through text that you can interact with it. So if we take, for instance, Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, we see that, in fact, as a species, we have a rich set of different kinds of intelligence, not merely the one that's more or less logical, mathematical, or spatial. It's also bodily kinesthetic, it's naturalist, it's intrapersonal and interpersonal. These are all ways in which we relate to the world that do not find a concomitant in AI at the moment. So AI is limited in various ways as well. AI has no common sense. There's been interesting work on this, on trying to create common sense, but at the moment I think it's fair to say it doesn't have any. It has no understanding of the meaning of its action, nor insight into the larger connections or consequences of it, which also makes it problematic. If we over-endow AI with responsibilities it cannot oversee. It will make mistakes or choices or optimizations, if you like, that can be entirely unintuitive to humans. It's called the brittleness problem. And it cannot reflect on its own decisions, and that's a problem known as lack of transparency or explainability. And it might perpetuate or even amplify certain biases in the data sets it's been trained with, which of course work out in real-world effects to negative effects of some groups that are interacting with AI. Thus, AI, for all its benefits, can also be regarded to be, well, a reflection of human subjectivity, and is not always feel safe or even predictable. Now, the nice picture on the right-hand side there is a Roomba, and this Roomba is of course meant to clean an apartment, but it came across some kind of animal excrement, a turd, for a better word, and basically it just did its thing without actually blinking an eyelash. Why? Well, the Roomba is just a programmed, relatively simple machine, and it doesn't understand what it means to clean, right? So even a child cleaning a room would not make this mistake. So there's no intrinsic understanding of what it means that somebody wants their house to be cleaned. Other examples of limitations of AI, I've mentioned already bias. AI is being trained predominantly on the data sets that are available, which tend to be sort of pale male databases, and underrepresented groups are not being recognized with the same accuracy, with all kinds of consequences. There are also interesting unforeseen outcomes. Here's one example. So here's a sort of an artificial life a simulation where the task was to create a robot, to this task for the AI, to create a robot based on the elements on the top left corner. and have it move from point A to point B. So our natural intuition would be that will be a walking and talking robot, more or less moving from A to B. But the actual solution was that it just stacked everything and dropped it, which is a correct solution, right? If you come to think of it. It's not something we would expect, though. But we hadn't actually defined the parameter space in such a way that would exclude this possibility. Another interesting example, it comes from the area of digital games and gameplay. And of course, a lot of AI development is done in virtual spaces and in digital game environments. And the AI wants to optimize, let's say, against losing a game. So it decides, and there's many examples, but it decides to basically pause the game forever, because then it can't lose. Of course, that's, again, a correct solution. However, it's not the essence of why we play games. So there's zero understanding of the larger context of why we want to engage in a game, and what are sort of the basic assumptions, common sense assumptions that we have once you engage in a game. A final example is a delivery robot. This has been a few years ago. I'm sure things have been repaired by now. But this delivery robot would sort of roam around a city in the Bay Area, delivering its stuff. And whenever there's a light that turns from green to red, it would stop on the sidewalk, but also, at the same time, blocking the sidewalk for people, for instance, in wheelchairs, where that point is the only point of entry onto the sidewalk. And actually, this happened in real life to real people in wheelchairs who got stuck on the intersection as the light turned for the cars from red to green. And so they're stuck, they can't enter the sidewalk, and this robot is in their way. So people got a little aggressive towards the robot. And of course, this assumes real-world knowledge, and real-world also social interaction to try and avoid this. So in a sense, the danger of AI is not that it's going to rebel against us, but it's going to do exactly what we ask it to do. However, we have not learned how to formulate our questions appropriately, and also in a way that is context sensitive, and in a way that's also is flexible enough to deal with unintended consequences. Now, more to the point of my talk, I think using human attributes, such as deep learning, being trustworthy, being responsible, although understandable that we use them, they also yield epistemic confusion, inflated expectation and misguidance as to the goals and purpose of the AI tools. Might also incidentally hide some of the human agency behind the AI that carries the eventual responsibility. So as AI technology advances, it becomes increasingly vital to really scrutinize also the metaphors by which we describe it, think about it, because it really also shapes our understanding. The words and the concepts that we use, the metaphors that we use, shapes our understanding of what AI is, what it could be, what it ought to be. And to close off, I'd like to just give a shout out to the importance of looking at psychology and social science, and also at sort of design sciences and human-computer interaction, for really designing ways of relating to AI as a productive tool that enhances our cognitive abilities. And this is really a problem of trying to align different kinds of representation sets, right? The representations that AI has of the world versus representations that we have of the world, and our understanding of it and the way we can interact with it. So we're trying to bridge that gap. Now, to do that, we need to have AI also appropriately and understandably communicate how it sees the world, what is its operational envelope, what might we expect it to understand versus what might we not expect it to understand, such that we do not over-endow it with a level of intelligence and potential responsibility it cannot have. And this is also related to the issue of lack of transparency, which I think hinders efforts to understand the social impact of the adoption of AI technology. Second, I think key element is that many of the faces of AI, the face that we see of AI is deeply social. It's a social robot, it's a chat GPT, it uses speech in our personal assistants, etc. So in all kinds of social pathways are being triggered automatically in humans, and we make all kinds of social attributions and intelligence attributions, again, which might be unjustified. And then it wrote a very pressing opinion piece in The Atlantic this year on counterfeit people, and especially how interacting with AI pretending to be somebody, or people pretending to be somebody else through AI, is actually quite corrosive to interpersonal trust, and actually to the larger structures of society that depend on interpersonal trust. So a third question here is how do we endow people with enough control in a meaningful and timely manner, where we don't overestimate the abilities of people to exert that control. For instance, if the EU Act that we just talked about would imply that people would have to pay attention whilst driving in a self-driving car, that's la-la land. That's not going to happen. People are going to be distracted all the time doing other things. So we need to actually make also realistic assumptions about human abilities in relation to AI. The ways in which we can meaningfully control AI need to fit our psychological makeup and our personal limitations. So finally, I'd like to close with a quote from a paper I really like by Carter and Nielsen. And they talk about how AI as a tool can offer us new primitives of thought, new ways of looking at the world that will enhance our thinking, but not replace our thinking. So they say at its deepest, interface design means developing the fundamental primitives human beings think and create with. This is a problem whose intellectual genesis goes back to the inventor of the alphabet, of cartography, musical notation, as well as modern giants such as Descartes, Playfair, Feynman, Engelbart, and Kay. It's one of the hardest, most important, and most fundamental problems humanity grapples with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wijnand. After hearing this very interesting story, I still have one question that I would like to ask you. I'm sure that the audience has a ton of questions that I would like to ask you too, but please keep them for during the break. But my question is, what is, according to you, the most urgent concern that we have to address in the AI community?
That's not a simple question, but thank you. So I think maybe so I mentioned a number of things, right? The deception, the de-skilling, the over-endowment of expectation, let's say, towards systems. I think one of the most corrosive at, let's say, a larger societal level is this issue of trust and sort of authentic interactions that we expect to be authentic being manipulated. So we're going to be, because of the let's say, large scalability of very accessible tools to create, for instance, fake identities, to create deep fake videos, to create a voice that sounds like somebody else, to create very believable interaction. We're very vulnerable and we have all kinds of cognitive pitfalls that make us very vulnerable to that. And you know, I think it will be at the detriment of trust, of interpersonal trust, but also trust in systems, in government, in money even, or in other kinds of virtual entities that rely on trust to work. So as deception is likely to be a part of the future of AI, I think we need, and this is also where the EU Act comes in, I think we need to really come down hard on those who try to utilize these tools to really deceive people, and so to be able to have that distinction still between, let's say, authentic humans on the other side of the interaction versus some kind of AI generated human. I think that's going to be a key issue.
Absolutely, yes. I also believe that trust is one of the most important things, trust in the system. And in my point of view, trust can only emerge when you understand what you're talking about, when you understand how it's working. And I think you have done a great job today at explaining us exactly, at least as far as was possible in this limited time that you had, to explain what AI is, how it works, how our brain works, how the AI brain works. So thank you very much for that. Like I said before, because of the time, I would like to ask you to ask your questions to Wijnand during the break. He will be here the rest of the day, I suppose. So ask him the questions that you have. So now we will continue with the next part of the program, which is the coffee break. So